Commission work session. Please call the roll.
Mayor Pam Triolo, absent for the role. Vice Mayor Andy Amoroso.
Here.
Commissioner Scott Maxwell.
Here.
Commissioner Omari Hardy.
Here.
Commissioner Herman Robinson.
Here.
Thank you.
Pledge of Allegiance led by Commissioner Hardy.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
For the record, Mayor Pam Triolo has entered the room.
Good.
How do you do?
Good to start.
Okay. We'll move right on to our topic of conversation for this evening. Discussion of economic investment climate and the opportunity zone of the city of Lake Worth Beach. Doing the presentation will be Mr. Waters.
I'm going to get started.
Okay.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. William Waters, Community Sustainability Director. We are really fortunate to have an outside consultant in our midst today that's going to be giving a sort of an overview of the economic development climate and conditions in South Florida as a related to increasing investment and opportunities within the city. It's a two-part presentation. The first part is by Marcela Campbell, who is a former employee of the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council. She's had extensive experience in Lake Worth going back probably over almost 20 years. She's a private consultant now and is an architect as well as an urban designer and planner. We are both from the University of Miami.
We won't hold that against you.
And I spoke to her recently and asked her to come give her outside, unbiased review of where we stood with our development program, land development regulations, comp plan, financial incentives and such, since we put a lot of things in place within the past year, and we know how much pressure there is to get and increase investment in the city. The second part of our evening will be a discussion of the Opportunity Zone designation that was made earlier last year. Dolores Key's going to give an overview of that, and we'll get into that as a secondary part, and also seeking consensus from you later to initiate a study of the Opportunity Zone to put together a strategic plan and sort of a master vision of what could happen and how it could happen in that area. So I'm going to turn it over to Marcela first, and we have a presentation from her, and there we go.
Thank you, William. Good evening, yes. Madam Mayor and Commissioners, Marcela Campbell, Principal of Marcela Campbell and Associates for the record. It's a pleasure to be in front of this board again. I don't know, Commissioner Robinson, which one of the multiple charrettes we've, we go back. We go back, way back. And William is right. I think that one of my first roles at the Regional Planning Council when I started working there was help with the implementation of the one-way pairs and the redo of the federals and argue with the Department of Transportation, because Lake Worth was the first city in this part of the region to actually do a master plan, a citizen's master plan, and to actually successfully implement that master plan. West Palm followed you, and everything down south, Boca, Delray, came a lot later. So Lake Worth has been at the forefront of planning and innovative zoning and design for a very long time. I'm not going to say how many years because you've already aged me. But William asked me to come and talk to you a little bit about what's going on in other cities. In my role for a very long time at the Regional Planning Council, and still doing a lot of the work and the planning with the Regional Planning Council, but also in my role as a private consultant, I get the chance to jump back and forth between working with staff in different local governments here in the region and also working with private developers trying to implement the policies that different staffs are trying to apply. And this is a workshop. I mean, if at any point you want to stop me and ask any questions, it shouldn't be a very formal presentation. Hopefully we can just make it into a discussion. Because, I mean, the stories about what's going on, who's doing what, who's being successful, who's not, are endless, and we, we can jump around a little bit. I'm happy to, to tell you as much as I know, and hopefully some of it will help you in your implementation plans and growth in the future. So, I would say that you're not alone. You're definitely not alone. I could have said that you were alone up until, no, I'm sorry, that there was one local government that was not on the growth sort of wagon or in the attracting development wagon up until October of last year, and that was Martin County, because Martin County had historically been an anti-growth county, and the city of Stewart had been in a very slow growth city. But as of last August, Martin County approved a new town, a 4,200 unit new town just between I-95 and the Turnpike, and they are very aggressively trying to develop that town, which is unheard of. I mean, in the climate of growth in our region, and that tells a lot. I mean, this is a county that realized that they had to do something to start attracting the workforce, to start attracting jobs, to really make their finances work. And so, yes, development in their own terms and within the character, but they realized that they had to start to do something for development. So when you realize that a community like Martin County is now a pro-development community, at least for that new town, you know that everyone is on that path. What I was going to say is every community I've ever worked in, and especially now, has incentives and policies to attract development in their own terms in place. Some more aggressive, some better crafted, some are more effective, some have resulted in great projects, and others have been complete disasters. And so, we're learning, and the good thing about this is that, we're close enough, and all your staffs are meet and talk to other staffs in all of these conferences that we have, and we get to learn from everybody else's experience. So I think the most important thing is to figure out why you need incentives and policies. But most importantly, what we always recommend to a city, if you want to start delivering a very clear message, is figuring out why you have your own policies. I bet if I asked each of you, why did you implement a very complete package of policies, I would probably get a slightly different answer from each one of you. And so I think it's important to figure out why as a community you need it. I mean, the city of Stewart is openly saying in their meetings, we have a $2 million shortfall annually. We are either going to cut services, they have their own police and their own fire. We are either going to have to increase taxes, or we have to increase density and attract more development because we have the short. I mean, they're very straightforward about it. So what is the reason for Lake Worth? What is it that you want to do? Some cities do it because they need to grow their economy or because they have a shortfall in their economy. Some cities do it, like Port St. Lucie, because they're tired of being a bedroom community and they want to attract jobs. It's impossible to drive in Port St. Lucie today, the sprawling capital of America. During the 90s, they were proud to say that they were the fastest growing city in America. They were unsuccessful, and they did have a lot of economic incentive policies there, and a couple of them were big fiascos. You've seen them all over the national news. But they were under, and still are under, a lot of pressure to attract jobs. Stagnant tax revenues, again, we have counties further north with aging populations that are taking advantage of every tax break on assessed values in the properties, and so a big percentage of the housing pays absolutely no taxes, but they're probably the sector of the population that needs the most services too, or the most expensive services. In many of the cities, what's going on is that the incentives are being put in because, to attract developers, to really help with the risk gap when developers are trying to come in to downtown areas. It is easier to develop in greenfield areas. It is easier to do sprawl. It is easier to get financing for conventional subdivisions. It is cheaper to get financing for conventional subdivisions. There's a lot more developers that build conventional subdivisions than there are developers that understand infill development, that understand the risks, that want to deal with, not just all the complications on the financial side, but all the complications on the construction side from building. And so a lot of communities go in and understand, and just to balance the playing field, they come in with financial incentives and other type of incentives to bridge that gap, that financial gap that it is to come in to infill areas. Some are doing it because they identify specific neighborhoods that are distressed, and an injection of capital, an injection of improvement in the public realm and distressed neighborhoods is usually what is needed to actually trigger development in other parts of the neighborhood, or to promote a certain type of growth because you want to create an entertainment district, or because you want to attract technology as jobs. So whatever that reason may be for Lake Worth, it's usually better if it's one or two things at a time and not everything at once, just focus. And you have policies. It's okay to have policies that capture everything, but at the same time, you have to decide, and maybe, tell me to shut up if you've already done it, but it's usually good to have a very clear, one or two part focus. Or, you have a CRA, to have a couple of agencies within the city that can help you focus on multiple areas, so that you can, really aggressively go after whatever that objective is for Lake Worth. Some of the challenges, again, of infill development, of building within a city, of not, building west of the turnpike or west of wherever sprawl starts here. Like I mentioned, sprawl is easier, sprawl is cheaper, a lot more developers that know how to do that. But that's changing, though, and I'll get into the demographics and what people are looking for, and who the buyers out there are. And so, in our business, we're predicting that a lot of those developers of conventional subdivisions are going to have to reinvent themselves, and a lot of them are trying to come into downtowns. The problem is they don't understand downtowns. You're lucky that you have talented staff that can guide them through the process. But those are going to be the developers that when they come into your city, say, oh, it's impossible to work with this city. They don't understand the rules. They don't know anything about development. And they don't realize that they're coming into a completely new set of rules, a completely new playground. And it's not as easy. As I mentioned, financing is harder for mixed-use projects. It's harder for infill areas. Financing, for example, for high-end condominiums or for condos in general is non-existent right now. There's financing for apartments, and a lot of the developers that understand the game in downtown are building apartments and thinking ahead on the condo conversion. You all may remember that we've had a wave of condo conversions, in the late 90s, early 2000s. It looks like because of financing, we may be a little bit there too, but also it has to do with affordability, supply and demand. I'll get into this a little bit later too. Housing is still expensive. Housing is still very expensive. As of February, we've had 86 consecutive months of price growth in condominiums, townhouses, and single-family homes in Florida. So for 86 months, prices. Right now, the market is cooling off a little bit. We don't see this as a recession, more as a reset. Again, 86 months of year after year increase in property values has really left a big portion of people in the market to buy a home out of the game. So it's hard. If you're trying to attract condos, just know that most cities are unable to do that. Again, Stewart had beautiful 1-acre parcel on the water in downtown. They bent over backwards, gave the developer everything he asked for. He was only going to do 22 units, and he figured, with all his friends in Connecticut, he would sell those in a month. It's been 18 months. He hasn't sold a single unit. I mean, the place is just beautiful. And now that parcel is very quickly being converted into a much denser, much smaller unit apartment and mixed use building, because the market, is calling for that. Stewart, like many of our smaller cities, and maybe it's the case here in Lake Worth too, has an issue with comps. So the market is very high for apartments, for luxury apartments, for micro units, but there's nothing around to do comps. And so banks are not lending the money to do that in cities like maybe Lake Worth or Lantana or Stewart, because there's no comps. In the case of Stewart, it was a local bank that did the first loan, working through the Business Development Board, working with assistance of other organizations locally to convince a local bank, finance the first one so that we can start setting comps for others to come in. After that one's almost completed. I think I have a couple of pictures to show you that. So do you have that first building, that first comp, or first 2 or 3? I know they don't go with just one. And then there's competition. Everything you're trying to do, everyone around you is trying to do. And you are really between a couple of the most competitive cities in the nation, not just in the region, but in the nation. Again, West Palm started after you, but they've gone, full steam ahead. Then came Boca. When we did Del Rey, I remember in the Del Rey charrette for Atlantic, the argument with the people in the community was, should we look like West Palm or should we look like Boca? and the room was very divided. And fortunately, they don't look like either. They crafted their own path, and they've worked on some of the most progressive land use and zoning and incentives in the region. They've been very, very progressive. I think they've redone their code 3 times. I'm helping them on their 4th one now. We helped in number 3 and number 4. Because a lot of the buildings that were coming out of the ground did not look like what they expected or did not look like the vision. They were very successful, but this takes a lot of adjusting, and none of it was done by just making it all, a free-for-all. They made it very easy and attractive for people to come in, but also very simply regulated. These images are not showing up. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to be clear about the municipality you were discussing.
Delray Beach.
Delray Beach. And they have a form-based code for their downtown.
They do.
Okay. All right.
They do. Actually, the form-based code, so the first form-based code, so the Regional Planning Council did their master plan, much like they did yours. The first form-based code was done by a firm that didn't have experience, and quite frankly, when they first did it, we were all really learning. They were not even called form-based codes. That one was a disaster. Nothing came out of the ground with that one. The second one, they loosened all the rules, and suddenly the community realized that they looked more like Fort Lauderdale than they did by the village by the sea that they wanted. I got to work with them on the 3rd iteration, which is a true form-based code. Their time frames, their turnaround to do that was very, very quick. Right now, I think only 2 buildings have been built under the new code. And now they're just expanding that to other areas. Now, there's a lot of cities thought that the solution was a form-based code. Village of Palmetto Bay, which incorporated, let's say 7-8 years ago, has been stuck in zoning in progress for the last 3 years. You also don't want to get, I mean, the problem with going into codes is it's great, but you really don't know when you come out of it. I mean, it depends on how your community feels about growth, how much leadership there is to push that process forward quickly. I mean, it's a great process. It's an expensive process, and it could have great outcomes, but it could also be very dangerous. Again, like I said, Village of Palmetto Bay, 3 years, and they thought they were, going to be in and out in 3 months.
Madam Mayor, thank you. So I just want to be clear. What you're saying is that a form-based code isn't necessarily the end-all be-all, but a good form-based code might help. But that they sometimes, if you want to implement one, that's the real deal. It takes a long time, and you need a lot of political leadership, and it can be tough. You might not know when you're coming out of it, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Because I mean, look, you have a vision, right? Lake Worth has a vision, and the first thing you have to do is, if the vision that you have is the vision that you want to see reflected in your form-based code. So that process takes a while. I am very biased. I am very, very much for form-based codes. I can tell you that there are very few communities in our region that have really trusted and gone full-blown. Even Del Rey doesn't have a full-blown form-based code. The truth about form-based code is it should be so simple. You focus about form, you tell someone how many stories they are, you know that form follows parking, so you establish your ratios and you back off. Most communities, because there's a thing called residence, can't do that, right? So there's compromises. So once you have your vision, you in order to do a true form-based code, it's very expensive. I mean, you have talent in-house, but I'm sure they're living out of their inboxes too with everything else that's going on. So usually that's not something that you want to do in-house because you want to get it done quickly. But it's, a process that you can't do for under $125,000, $150,000. And then you have to go through, and that's not including the vision. That's if you already have the vision. And then once you're done, yes, you have, but you guys have most of the components there. I think there's a couple of things that you could do to maybe, in my opinion, are a few things that are controversial or that kind of say one thing, but then, and I understand why they're there. We can talk about those. And if this is something that you want to start working on as a separate path, then that's great. But the form-based code in and of itself won't bring you the development. The clear path, the clear leadership, the expedited process, maybe a catalyst project will.
What would you say when you mentioned Delray Beach? Because a lot of people will say, we're like, no, we're not Delray Beach. When you talk about how they were the sea, city by the sea, and you look at, I just remember historically, the infill that happened initially was very apropos with what we're going through here. But then it seems like they've changed the code or changed it to allow buildings to be built on top of buildings. And that's really when it changed.
Well, that was the first problem. I mean, what nobody liked was the result. I mean, because and Stewart also wanted to redo their code. And I said, okay, we're going to spend 3 years. And listen, I make a good living by writing codes. We're going to go through 3 years of heartache. And at the end, we're going to have a really pretty code. And we will have nothing to show because nothing will have happened in that period. I am of the belief that it's something that you go into in a period of a recession. When you're not afraid of losing the momentum of what's going on. The most of the buildings that came out of Del Rey, again, the Fort Lauderdale look as opposed to the Village by the Sea, were the result of a poorly implemented quasi-form-based code. It had nothing, form-based doesn't have to be architectural style. In this case, they were allowing buildings to just go on forever, 600 feet of the same exact repetitive facade. The actual master plan called for 3 stories, and they somehow were showing up with, because what they had was height in feet as opposed to stories, they were finding these buildings that looked like a stack of pancakes, where people had just stacked floors because it fit in the height, as opposed to a code that just said 3 stories, period. So they had a lot of issues of that sort. There was in their case, it didn't work in their favor. There was a lot of land assembly, and land assembly can be a great thing. I mean, we all know great buildings. I mean, shoot, go to Paris. You know, you can have a beautiful, you know, block after block after block of the same facade, and it's beautiful because the design is exquisite. When you have block after block after block of bad architecture, you know, it just kills the character of a community. They hit the reset button. The first thing they did before doing their new form-based code was their architectural design guidelines, so that at least what was coming out of the ground had to look, and that was very well received by the community. They have 7 different architectural styles, and all they're saying is your architecture needs to be authentic. And if you're going to do something that's not one of our styles, you need a licensed architect to come and explain to us why this is better than any of the authentic styles that we're accepting. They're not saying you can't do it. You know, but just because my friend next door, whose, you know, uncle was an architect, did this drawing, was not good enough anymore. And we have a lot of that.
Vice Mayor?
I just wanted to make a couple comments. So for years, we had no growth. And in the last 7 years, we've had some great growth. And I contributed to, you know, the commission and the great staff that we now have. And as we move forward, I think we still need to tweak some things. You know, I think we can look at some things and go a little higher, go a little wider. You know, we need more infill. But, you know, we're moving in the right direction. But I'd love to have, because you had alluded to, you have a couple things that may not be working, or a couple things that we may not be doing right.
Yeah, and we can talk about it. I mean, you're right. It's not just you know, take the Del Rey example. Everybody kind of came out of the gates in the 90s, sometime in the 90s. And there are communities, you know, Lake Worth, Del Rey kept one master plan, and they've gone through 4 iterations of codes. West Palm was 95 for them, City Place. They've had 3 iterations of codes.
And we quite often, like you said, West Palm Beach was behind us,
Yes.
but we fall behind financially because, again, you know, our tax revenue has gone up, but we still have large amounts of $25,000 condos, $50,000 condos that have sat. So unless we think outside that box, we quite often hear we don't want to be another Del Rey. No, we want to be a Lake Worth Beach. However, we need enough smart growth to pay the bills. And we quite often, you know, try to keep up with our neighbors, but financially we don't have that. And any other city of our size would have millions and millions of dollars compared to what we're bringing in. So we need to creatively figure out, you know, what our inventory looks like and how we can get and fit into that box, which is Lake Worth Beach.
You know, and there's all sorts of analyses that you can do that help guide investment to the right place and the right kind of development. And this is a new thing, so if you haven't done it, it's okay, but do you know what your cost to provide services per acre is in each one of your different areas in your community? Don't look at Will.
Well, we look,
but
we look at the staff for that information. However, you mentioned micro units. You know, I truly believe that, you know, we should look at some micro units, some small retail space. You know, half of our downtown is empty because it's large retail space, and it takes that financial person to buy into that. But if we had smaller retail, you know, or have broken up some of these larger retail.
yeah, and you know, retail is so fickle. There are so many things. I think Del Rey, excuse me, I'm gonna keep calling you every city around you name. I think it was not until the TOD master plan happened when Robert Gibbs was in town. Up until then, there was still sort of a prohibition against national retailers. I mean, I think this was the last city in the county to not want to have national retailers. And I remember distinctly Bob telling the commission, it was, well, you know, just because you say they can't come here and you say you want mom and pops, it doesn't mean that your residents are going to go buy in those mom and pops. They're still going to buy the backpack and the pair of shoes and everything they need for their kids to start school. I think it was near the beginning of the school. And they're going to go to the cities north and south of you to do that. They're not going to go, you know, and if their kid wants the latest shoe of a certain brand, I don't know, I don't want to say brands, but you had a shoe store, and if it's not being sold there, they're not going to buy it here. And so I think that, I believe that that's not a policy that's in place anymore. So, you know, things with retail, I think retail is one of those things where you have to be the most flexible and understand and adapt. Bob went to Jensen Beach, and Jensen Beach had small stores, and they had, you know, everything, and they didn't understand why it wasn't working. And they almost kicked him out of the room, but he was the first guy that came in and told them the truth. And he says, just invest in Windex. You know, your windows are dirty, your menus are greasy. Why would I come back? So, you know, Stewart had a problem because the mom and pops were open from 9 to 5. You know, who shops? So one of the things that Main Street did was provide funding that would allow those mom and pops to hire someone, and the condition was it had to be open during nights when the theater had an event on Fridays, Saturdays. It had to be open until 9 o'clock, you know, and they had to hire a manager because obviously places that have successful retail have someone that manages it. So, and right now it's one of the most diverse shopping experiences in the region. So in their case, it wasn't about size, it was about operations. In the case of Jensen, it was just dirty. You know? So.
Well, that's like the city of Chattanooga. When I went there, they actually put a pamphlet together for its small business owners on and teaching them how to improve their curb appeal, window baskets, plantings, cleaning regimens, flyers. I mean, actually the city put together this whole booklet to show people, hey, listen, if you're having issues with not getting customers in, here's a great thing that you can do and how you can do it and the resources you can rely on the city to provide for you.
You know, the town of Palm Beach had Worth Avenue and Royal Poinciana, and they were on, you know, both ends of the spectrum. Lake Worth, every retailer in the nation conducts walking tours of how you should light retail, how you should, you know, display, and then they move over to, or they used to move over to Royal Poinciana to show exactly, and it was all in the same town. So, you know, it is a science, and that's one of the things that can be done. You know, investing or putting policies or having your agencies like your CRA, bringing a consultant that helps retailers, that tells them what they need to take off their window.
We just did that.
You did?
Yeah,
Okay.
we nurture our mom and pops. I mean, they are
Okay.
they are
So that's,
organically
I mean, that's
here,
important
and we
because they
nurture
can't
them.
afford that.
Yeah.
You know?
But also we're open to all types of businesses throughout the community now too.
Right.
But we're at a crossroads.
And you have to focus. Where do you want to do that? Because you can start in one place and then it trickles.
And I think my next comment is directed to staff, but also, you know, the partnering that we're doing with the CRA. But I think one thing that, you know, even, you know, 7-8 years ago when I sat on the CRA, we fought to get the Publix. Now, you know,
I remember
and
that.
I quite
Yep.
We're
often,
here for that.
I quite often say when you're sitting in LA or you're sitting somewhere and you look at little old Lake Worth and you pull up blogs and you pull up whatever you get, you know, the crime stats that aren't necessarily our crime stats, you know, if I bring you to Lake Worth and William takes you out and shows you our city, you're investing here. But if you're sitting in LA and you pull up some of the things, you say, 30% poverty, you look at different things, they don't see that we sit at the base of one of the richest cities in the world. So it's a harder sell. So, I think that, how do you get past that hard sell? Because we are fabulous. We're Lake Worth Beach. We sit, on an ocean, walking distance. How do we sell that better to get, I'm not opposed to, when we first got Starbucks, prior to that, we called Starbucks 2 or 3 years later, and they're like, we're not looking at Lake Worth, and then 3 years later, all of a sudden they're opening. Something planted that seed. So how do we get that seed planted?
Yeah, if you have people that are just looking at demographics from, an office in Michigan, it's not going to happen. The story of the initial investor bank and then the local bank for Stewart was the developer brought them to have dinner. That's in Stewart to a nice restaurant. Flew them down. So, and this is, the financing entity. I was going to talk a little bit about that too, as a couple of suggestions too. It's what do you market and to who? So, for example, the city of West Palm is going to have next month a ULI forum, an Urban Land Institute forum. Unlike, most of the stuff I go to, which is for planners or urban designers, their membership, they're 90% developers. And a lot of cities do these, they offer these TAPs, these technical advisory panels. The ULI brings a group of experts, 50% of them are developers. They solve or they propose a solution for problem X that you pick as a city. They do presentations, they do tours. But what's neat about that is that, again, the people they bring are developers. Many end up investing in the cities where they go help in the TAPs. And they market that to their entire membership, which is all developers. So I think it's trying to get to the right people, and then, the people that are investing. There's no point in trying to tell Toll Brothers, hey, who you are. They're not going to come here. But trying to find those developers that are moving out of the saturated market in Miami and Fort Lauderdale and are trying to find a place that is competitive. And, this is one example, one of those organizations.
But unlike Delray Beach or others, or West Palm Beach, we're 7 square miles. So every bit of land or every area is an area that we have to really think about, because we've got diverse populations. We've got some of the wealthiest and some of the poorest. You know what I mean? So you're not dealing with one cookie cutter solution that solves.
Every area is different.
You know what I
Every
mean?
strategy is customized.
You need safe and affordable housing. You need job creation. You need, there's areas that need more of one and not the other. We're just finally putting roads in on streets that didn't even have roads or street lights or fire hydrants or whatever. It's
well, and that's where,
so.
And you're not alone in that. That's why I said if you're going to have a catalyst project or two, a catalyst event or two, what is that? Because it doesn't mean that everything else is not important.
But we have to be very particular because we only have the 7 square miles.
Right.
Every store, every individual store, every piece of land, every property, every whatever is so much more important to us.
It doesn't mean that the policy doesn't need to be in place for everything.
Okay.
But at the same time, there are things that you can do that will trigger a quicker result that, trickles down more or that is more visible. Again, I'm sorry to keep going back to Stewart, but Stewart, the entrance to town was really horrid. They overdid it in the streetscape for Colorado, which, by the way, a streetscape is what West Palm is going back to now in West Palm to try to correct a lot of the problems they were having with their retail. They used to have pawn shops and car dealers and all sorts of horrid things coming into little historic downtown. Just that streetscape has turned every single property around there.
Yeah, it's beautiful
So, the entrance, right? And they went bump out overboard.
Yeah.
It's crazy. But, they had to do something extreme to really change it. Just putting a few trees wasn't going to do the trick.
Yeah.
And you remember it was,
Yeah.
wide and horrid
Or-
and
Unsafe.
and had 3 pawn shops on a 4-block stretch.
And strip joints.
Just and Stewart, did they narrow the
They did.
roadway?
Yes.
Okay. And so they basically did a road diet.
It was a road diet.
Okay.
You got all the terms. Are you a planner?
I'm not a planner, but
Okay. But you've been here too long.
But we play one on television.
Yes.
okay. All right.
They did. They did a road diet. They changed lights, which are intersections that make you stop for permanently moving intersections.
How
And
narrow
that-
did they do? Did they diet their roads?
it was 5 lanes. It was a suicide lane and 4 lanes, and it's just 1 lane in each direction now. So
Wow. So they took away
they put on-street parking.
how many lanes did they take
Well,
away?
it was 5,
So
and
is
now it's
there-
2 lanes.
with no center turn lane.
Nope. They have the median. There's a couple of places where you can stop in the middle and turn.
So they took away 3
Yep.
travel lanes. And
Oh my
Armageddon
goodness,
did not
that's the
occur.
way into the hospital.
Right.
You have to,
Right.
but it took leadership.
Right.
People were, there were no trees for them to tie themselves to along the street, but they were really up in arms, especially people from outside the community, from Palm City and from unincorporated Martin County, because they were saying, how are we going to get to the hospital in an ambulance when you narrow it down to, from 5 lanes to 2? They would have rather had a street where people can get killed every single day or murdered or mugged, rather than have, the occasional ambulance having to go a little slower.
So do you mind if I?
Please.
No.
So they took away lanes. Did they narrow the travel lanes that they left there?
Yeah, they had
Did they
12
start at 12
foot-
and go to 10?
No, they're 11.
They're 11.
They
okay.
could have gone down to 10, but it's fine. With all the bump outs they put in there, we probably need them at 11.
And you felt that both taking away the lanes.
Traffic flows continuously.
right.
Before, you were really by yourself and 5 lanes of traffic. You had to stop in 2 lights. When the lights turn, green, everybody was upset, and so they would floor it to try to
Right.
get, to the roundabout and then screech and come to a halt.
Rural area, though.
Yeah,
Well,
it's the entrance to downtown, and it was a 4-block stretch between US 1 and downtown.
So this is something I say when talking with residents when they talk about west of Dixie Highway and Lake and Lucerne. I said, if Dixie Highway were right here, right, if it were the same width as, say, K Street or J Street, I wonder how much action Lake and Lucerne would get west of Dixie Highway. Because if you're wondering why people don't, I walk across the street. You saw me walking across the street, ride my bicycle
Riding your
across the
bike,
street here today, right?
The
But
quintessential sustainable commissioner.
it's literally 6 lanes right here, right at the downtown. You have 2 travel lanes, a turn lane on each side. And we wonder why people don't walk back and forth across Dixie Highway, because it's scary.
Yeah.
And so
Well, 6 lanes is I-95. So, this part of Lake and Lucerne were like that before the one-way pair charrette, the 92 master plan. And the same thing, you were the first city that successfully did a road diet. We didn't call them that back then, on the Federals and on Dixie.
But on Dixie, we expanded because they took away the on-site parking on Dixie Highway and created more lanes. More travel lanes, I believe, on Dixie Highway. Is that not correct?
Yes.
They took away the on-site parking, yeah. That was part of, 90s, I think it was.
Earlier. You're talking about Dixie?
Probably like 93.
93. Yeah, Dixie Highway. 'Cause the problem is now if we just use it as a pass-through, so it's not
Right.
just our residents using
Right.
it, it's a pass-through for people to
Yeah,
get from point A
local,
to point B.
semi-local and through traffic. Yeah.
Exactly. Vice Mayor, I'm sorry you had your light up.
I think Scott was up before.
You were, but I'll go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Marcela. Madam Mayor, I apologize. I've been a little bit distracted for the last couple of weeks. I guess I wasn't fully aware that this presentation was going to be part of our meeting tonight, and nor did I understand the ordering of it, and we've lost a couple of prominent community leaders here that were here for the Opportunity Zone presentation. I'm just wondering how much longer
Okay,
this is.
I just have a couple more slides, but
Okay.
I can go quickly.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry.
Vice Mayor.
So in Stewart, were those roads DOT?
Okay, so in Stewart, that one was a city road, but Sewell's Point did it on a DOT road.
Okay, because that's what I quite often struggle with, and with residents, is here in the middle of downtown is DOT.
Atlantic Avenue was DOT.
Okay, but,
And Federal and Dixie.
Yep.
well, because I still.
It just depends
you
on
know,
how much you want to fight.
Well, and that's it. You know, we have a bus stop right here with no pull out.
Yeah, but usually
you know, it's
DOT, I
ongoing.
mean, and you have a really good district secretary right now. And it's also many times when you got the bike lanes removed to a street over north and south so that you could narrow Lake and Lucerne. A lot of it is negotiating with them. I mean, you know, at the end of the
And-
day,
and
the
that's-
model needs to work
That's
and
something
lanes
we
are
need to
lanes.
talk about too, is the bike lanes. Some bike lanes go nowhere, some are old bike lanes that people are on the bike lanes going the wrong way. You know, it's very, very confusing.
So I'm not going to talk about all the other challenges because we've touched upon them. The images are not showing up. Are they showing on yours? Let's see. Do they show on yours or no? On the slides? Are they showing empty? This will make the presentation a lot quicker if the images are not showing. But I just had a couple more slides showing, you know, how the market has changed, how home buyers are not what we understand as the typical family or the typical home buyer, you know. And even though about 62% of what is being built today is single family homes, only about 27 to 30% are conventional families with children. So, you know, there's a disparity which is adding to the problem of supply, which then makes housing also more expensive in infill areas. Do you see them there or no?
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
In the meantime, while they
Yeah.
work on that, do you see, I mean, we all knew about the whole Western Ho back to the Western communities that we experienced back
Yes,
with, you know.
Westward Ho.
Westward Ho.
Eastward.
Eastward
Now,
Ho.
no, it's,
Eastward Ho is why I came to the regional planning.
well, no, I'm saying when we went,
Yeah.
but it was the Western, everyone
Yes.
moved out to the gated communities with the A-rated
Yes.
schools and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But now we're finding, you know, like, when I sit on the TPA, which formerly the MPO, you know, we're looking at money. They didn't put any money aside for Dixie Highway and Federal Highway and all of that then. And they planned 9 million flyovers and bridges and stuff to the Western communities because they anticipated there'd be 9 million people living out there, and there are now. Well, just in Palm Beach County, but now they all want to come. Now their kids are grown, they're out of college or whatever, and they're moving east. So the cities are packing them in now, but a lot of the road projects haven't quite.
You know,
ended up here.
what's interesting, and part of that is happening, and I had a couple of slides to show you about that. You know, the two largest generations, two of our largest generations are converging right now in these 5 to 10 years. The baby boomers and the millennials, and they all want the same thing. You've
Yeah.
heard this over and over again, right? They're all looking for amenity-rich environments. They're all looking for walkable environments. They're all looking to live and work and play in the same or in
Smaller
close
units.
proximity, and you know and that's in downtown. So this is good. I mean, it would be bad if you were, you know, one of the communities out west. So you have this sort of audience that is really looking for the product that they want, but there's no supply. I mean, the cities can't build it fast enough. What we were building in the past decade was really very expensive. There you go. Let me just go really quickly through these. Done? Or you want to click? So this is a little bit what I was trying to tell you. You know, the typical traditional one-worker family has really changed. Only under 8% is that type of family. The stay-at-home mom family is only a little over 6%. You know, and a lot of what we've been building was catering still to that model. Stay-at-home dad now is about 2% of the households in the U.S. A married couple with children, about 21%. So a small component. And again, remember I told you about 60% of what's being built is really still, I mean, we have to catch up and change the building types. Other households with children, you know, grandparents with children's, uncles, aunts with children's. This is what we were just saying. The largest generations, mostly 1 and 2 person households, and they're converging. In the green, you see the millennials. In the black, you see the boomers. And it's hard to tell here, but we are right. I'm afraid of touching.
It's not a touch
The
screen.
red wire, the red one is or is it off? I want to turn it on. But we are right in the middle of the decade where the largest convergence of these two really big demographic groups are looking for the same thing, and that thing they're looking for happens in downtowns and happens in infill areas. And we need to catch up and understand who those buyers are, what they're looking for, and provide it. And we lost the images again.
Nope, no,
Nope,
back.
you're back up.
8 to 12% of home purchases are single men. I guess we lost again. A higher percentage is single women. 35 to 37% traditional and non-traditional families with kids. Again, and that's why I was saying, and 62 to 67% are homes for traditional families. So the numbers are off, which is why it makes those units that are catering to what people are looking for so expensive too. I have done a list of incentives. A lot of these you have, and I think I failed to highlight some of the ones that you already have. You have financial incentives and tax breaks. You have regulatory incentives in place and development, sort of the single point of contact and taking someone, which is really good. You have infrastructure incentives. Like I said, I failed to put some. There's land assembly and cost of land assembly incentives that, you know, Delray, Stewart are doing. Brownfields programs for maybe your industrial park, the reduced parking requirements, transportation payment assistance, the live where you work incentives. Go ahead.
So,
Majority.
could you thank you.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry as well.
Yeah.
Could you talk to me about the reduced parking requirements?
So reduced parking.
Parking in cities generally.
Yeah, reduced parking requirements works when you're realistic about it. You know, if you have a way to either on foot or by bike or other means of transportation to get to your you know, to at least some of the trips that you would otherwise do by car, then it makes sense to start reducing. You know, we know that a typical family normally makes about 14 trips a day. And trips, the DOT considers every time you get in your car and you stop and you get, so if you get out of your house and stop at the grocer and then, you know, stop at school to drop off your kid and then go to the doctor's or to work, each one of those is a trip. So if out of the 14, you know, you can start to see, okay, I can potentially walk to Publix and I can potentially, you know, walk to a restaurant or a coffee shop, and I could walk to a bus stop. Depending on how many things you have nearby that would allow you to reduce is how aggressive you can get with parking. Boston, Miami is now allowing buildings without any parking. Boston is penalizing you if you put parking. So it depends on what the policy is. When a city has invested a lot in public transportation and transit, or a county, then you have to get a lot more aggressive and prevent parking from happening. You know, your mixed use allows you to do to establish a matrix of reduction. It depends on the conditions, and not every area is created equal. You know, you don't. It's distance. So I'm trying to be conscious. I'm happy to keep going forever, but we can talk about parking reduction a lot. But that's a big one. And you know what?
Not without public transportation.
Not without public transportation. But what's interesting too is you could. Sorry. You could come in and say, we will allow you to build without any parking. And the developer designs a building without any parking, and the lender won't lend them the money.
Correct.
So it's hard. The financing industry is not there in many of the markets. They're not there yet because they're going to look at these things and they're going to say, great, you have a bus. It's not enough. You don't have a metro. Yeah. So and you don't have comps.
May I ask one follow-up?
Sure.
So in addition to the public transit, mixed uses, really important to parking reform?
Absolutely. And, again, it's not about making everything walkable. It's about providing option, providing choice, and the ability to allow people to make some of those trips that they would otherwise, and probably on a rainy day, they will still do in their car, but to otherwise not do it. And, plus we are in an era we're seeing in the cities south of you and in Orlando, I mean, all the car sharing programs and apps, in DC, it's amazing. You see these cars, there's a truck in this block and there's an SUV in the other one, and you reserve it on your phone and you get in and you drive and you have to park it in the same spot and it will be empty because that's reserved for that program and that vehicle. So, there was a time when everybody had, a landline at home, right? And today most people just have a cell phone and no more landline. We're seeing that with cars, the trend is going in that direction. We're not saying that homes will have no more cars, but development in cities will tend to be much more like, the metropolises that we already know. The houses with cars in them will be less than those without, because you'll be able to, and especially, again, the millennials don't want it, and the boomers are aging even more, so they're soon not going to be able to drive.
Hey, tell that to my 82-year-old father.
My mom is 84. Yeah, tell me. So, just some short-term actions. Yeah.
The last
Oh.
item there, you were going
Okay.
to talk to us a little bit about that.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm trying to rush. Very successful. One of the key things that was successful in West Palm, for example, and they were the first ones to use this, and then nationally it's been used in many cities, but they came up with this one. It was time-limited zoning entitlements. So the city essentially came out and said, if you come to downtown, we'll give you, in their case, we'll give you 3 additional stories. We don't care the density that you put in. This is our parking requirement, but you have to be breaking ground in 2 years. If you don't break ground, you lose even if you have your approvals. And part of that was to generate that sense of urgency, but to stop the speculation. The big problem with just doing a code that increases somebody's rights is that you've just increased speculation. So the sense of, and it was really successful. I mean, downtown West Palm got kickstarted like that, and a lot of other metropolitan areas have done the same thing. That is a very successful one. Short term, understand what those policies, more aggressive policies are that you would want to work on. You have a lot of great ones. If there are any catalyst projects, anything that you think would really set a trend or create a big impact, focus on those. And identify those as the more deserving recipients of aggressive programs or policies. And historic preservation has always been a big thing in Lake Worth, and understanding, where you want to focus on that, or projects that are, going to provide you substantial benefits. I was talking about some simple revisions. Now, I didn't go in depth through all of your code, but I'm not a fan of FAR, personally. I mean, of course you are. You've been talking form-based code the whole time. Part of it is, it's a headache. And if you've established your setbacks, and if you've established, your parking, and if you've established your height, why go through the headache of the calculation of a percentage, which really doesn't allow the free market to be the free market that we all want to try and support. Now, you have to be very careful as to what those setbacks are. But once you get into that, I am also a fan of stories versus height. We saw it in Del Rey. I can look out the building and say that building is 1 story, but if you ask me if it's 22 feet, 25 or 20, I have no idea. If you do that, you have to be very careful with with the mezzanine, because someone's going to come in with a 20-foot story and then try to sneak in. Yeah, we've seen it before, right? You have incentives that are tied to land assembly. That's great. I don't think it's realistic, personally. How many times did you offer someone a really good deal when they knocked on your door to buy your house and it was not for sale? It's very hard. The small investor that has one lot and needs to go to his neighbors to try to assemble, unless you allow the assembly of land without unity of title. St. Lucie County does that. They can get together and submit a joint plan. But in urban areas, it's really hard. How do you do a joint plan for a multifamily building? So it's good, but if you're putting too much on something that is probably not financially feasible, maybe there's a better way of doing that. I can just mention two more things, but go ahead.
I'll wait until you're done.
Yeah.
I'll wait until you're done.
At the same time, I again understand why you're doing it. And look, pushing for more aggressive development policies is hard because you're at the same time balancing the character of the community and the will of the residents. Your land assembly program is still tied to a percentage setback. So the bigger your lot gets, because your setbacks are a percentage of your frontage, the bigger your setbacks get. So on the one hand, I went through all the trouble of doing this assembly to get more density, but on the other hand, I get less land to build in. And in an infill, every inch counts. Literally, every inch counts. So I understand why it's done, but it's also conflicting. Why would I pay more for a property and then be penalized on where I can build?
Isn't that what the city of Naples did, the setbacks?
The percentage setbacks, a lot of cities did it and switched. I mean,
Was it?
It's
the downtown has some beautiful buildings in there.
you're talking about the step back
Step back,
in
yeah.
height. This is, in yours is, it's 10%, or I don't remember if it's 10% or a percentage of your lot frontage is your side setbacks. So if your lot is 50 feet, you have 5, but if it's 100 feet, now you have 10, and if it's 2, so I assemble a block, 600 feet, and I have to leave 60 feet on either side. And it's, you're going through the effort of buying land, and then you're losing developable land on a percentage wise, when most cities are built, if 10 is 10 and 5 is 5, your downtown has the same setbacks everywhere. I think you have some landscaping requirements that any landscaper in the room always freaks out about these things. I honestly don't care how many trees somebody has in their backyard. If you're going to put landscaping requirements, make them about the public realm. Why do you care about how much they put in their yard? Nobody's going to try to sell a house that they didn't put a little bit of, TLC in the front yard.
Second that motion.
But make sure that every time a development comes, and if they tell you I don't have room to put a tree in front of my house or 3, okay, give me your trees. I have somewhere to put them. Simple things too. Well, again, I don't know if your TCA would allow it. You have a system of density bonuses. I think it's great. It could probably be simplified a little bit, unless you're having so many people knocking on your door that you really have to keep it down. Maybe something that could just be simplified. But other than that, you have a really complete package of incentives. It is a hard thing to do. We talked about, this is the one in Stewart, I told you, their apartment complex. The city gave them the land for free, FYI. It's a 99-year lease, and they're looking at purchasing it. But again, to get the first one going, Del Rey is doing a big land assembly by the CRA, very discounted rate for the land also to get West Atlantic going. West Palm, this is in an effort to improve the retail experience. They've gotten rid of most of their parking and really turned this into a very sort of balanced mobility system. Pompano, the sacred parking lot for their beach is now a parking garage and a public-private partnership and they've activated that beach completely. And I didn't say it in Lake Worth Beach. And this is what we mentioned earlier. ULI, they're doing a forum. You would think that West Palm Beach is not in a situation where they are still trying to attract people. This is one of the tools. They're saying attend the West Palm Beach forum to see how they deal with all of those people in that photograph are developers. Have you been to Brightline? You get to Miami, all the signs that say work in Miami, live in West Palm. Market with the right people, and if you tie it with the right companies. I mentioned originally the programs. There's transportation incentives too, where live here, we'll help you foot the bill to get, if it's Brightline or the train, wherever it is you're going. So I'll leave you with that. I think we jumped around, but kind of talked about all of these. I think you're doing. I mean, my heart is here in Lake Worth. I've been here so many times.
Thank you. So the pastor has left the building.
I'm sorry. Yes.
But I just want to say amen. About FAR, I agree. Incentives for land assembly. Are you talking about minimum lot requirements? Are you talking about the more robust incentives we provide to people?
No,
if they get
I'm
up to 2
saying,
acres?
so a lot of what happens with land assembly is the local government does it. The CRA does it. You have more tools, more ability to overpay for a site and then assemble it and sell it at the right price for the developer. Again, remember we started with bridge that gap because assembling land usually is not inexpensive. And it takes a long time where you have to have, for the most part, cash deals with the money that sits there for a very long time, and that's not something where there's financing available for that. So
you put this under your category of potential revisions. What would you, I guess, revise?
In the land assembly?
Yes.
Well, after you've gone through a complicated land assembly process to actually get increased density, I would revise it in the sense that I would simplify how you are awarding the increased density, because I guess the more you assemble, the more you get. Right. And I would revise this personally. I would revise the setback situation in that one as well. I mean, because I've gone through all this effort, but now I can build in proportionally in less land.
So you're saying the process or the mechanism by which people get the max density that we allow, you would simplify that process, and you would also probably reduce setbacks?
And change the setbacks, because on the one hand, you get rewarded with density, and on the other hand, you get penalized with how much land you can step on.
Okay. And then the landscape requirements, you said they should be about the public realm. Can you talk to me about how on their private property a developer might enhance the public realm with landscape?
In their private property?
Well, I mean, if you have landscape requirements, obviously we're talking about what's happening on their parcel.
Right.
So what could they do on their parcel that would enhance the public realm?
So what you can do on their parcel, Del Rey has that, for example, you give them additional density. If what you want is to increase the public realm, so you give them additional density. In the case of Del Rey, it was a step back and an additional story. And they create a privately owned, publicly accessible open space. So they create small plazas and pocket parks within their private property in exchange for some development, and
we have that already, don't we? Yeah.
I'm telling everything I was telling William. Did you do it? I mean, you have them.
He's good.
What you have to be
good.
careful with these, and I didn't see exactly how you have those, is that the size, that when it's designed, and that's why I think what you have in here is great. It's critical that your first buildings that come out of the ground look great. If the first buildings that come out of the ground don't look great, then you've kind of made it even harder to achieve your goals. So a lot of hand-holding in the first few projects. You have the talent in-house to help people with a design, and if you have to break the rules a little bit for greatness, it's okay. Break the rules just to make somebody's pro forma work is not okay. And then the other thing is, you tell them, don't put any, I don't care what you're doing in your backyard. All of your trees, all of your landscaping requirement has to be, help me figure out this street. Help me landscape, the street your building is in.
Shade trees?
Shade trees, palm, depending on,
Palm
is it a
trees.
commercial tree, a street, or is it a residential? If you put a shade tree in front of a retailer, they're gonna freak out. So depends on the type of street.
I appreciate it.
I just want to say, when you talked about assembling properties, it's really one of our biggest challenges is for a developer to assemble properties here in Lake Worth, because there are so many smaller lots owned by so many people that assembling a lot big enough to do any larger projects is near impossible.
Right.
To not only track down who are the individual owners on this piece and this piece and this piece and that, right? Is that not correct?
We've been
And then when you knock on
successful
their
with
door,
our
they want a
CRA.
ridiculous amount for the,
Right.
actually, City Place, if you know the story.
I know those
Yes.
stories.
We
Yeah.
always joke that it's the guy begging for money at the end of all the assembling of land. So,
We know the people that beg for the land.
Yeah, so,
Well, the most
Living in
successful,
our community.
the most successful we've been with that is the CRA. 'Cause the
CRA.
CRA
That's
has been able
why-
to go in and
the incentive is for the local government to have to do that. And once you've assembled the money, once you've assembled the land, your goal is not to get every penny that you paid for that site. Like I said, Stewart gave it up for free. I mean, Delray just put the Atlantic piece, they had 8 candidates, 7 offered $4 million for the land, and 1 offered 0 and asked for 13 million, and guess who they picked?
Right.
So at the end of you look at the long-term benefit of what that is going to give you.
Well, and I just wanted to say that's one of our challenges, because the perception, the people are looking, oh, you're buying the land, you're giving up the land, that's what CRAs and cities do. Unfortunately, we didn't have a lot of land to use as incentive. So we had to, with our CRA and the city, go out and buy it to entice development, to bring in the small livable workspaces that we need, and then get it back on the tax rolls with bigger and better.
In the
and
first
people
few
living-
years, because there was a lot of community resistance, what the CRAs were doing was through the TIF, just returning the money, right? But it was a different time too. Financing was a lot cheaper and a lot easier to get. Financing has gotten, right now, very difficult, which is why, if you don't help them start, and I mean, your staff can do that when a project comes in. It's the long term. Usually, if the project shows you a benefit at the end of that incentive period, or a benefit beyond the discount or investment, then it's here for the long term.
And the benefit looks like something different all the time. It may be taxes,
Right.
it might be people living,
You have the whole
shopping.
palette. That's great.
Yeah.
On the one hand, the fact that and not everything is going to apply to every project, but it's good that you have.
The hard thing too, though, is the transportation challenge here in Palm Beach County. Not just like we stand to benefit. When you talked about millennials and baby boomers and wanting walkability, whatever, that commuter rail that they've been talking about for the longest time, that's going to come along the FEC tracks or whatever, that's going to be a boom for a lot of downtowns.
You are
When it comes, we're right
incredibly
there.
positioned, yes.
Public transportation is number one, whether you're elderly, whether you don't have a car, own a car. And we have a lot of citizens in the community that don't own automobiles, that rely on public transportation. And right now, it's pretty much a bus. And then a bus to the tri-rail station. And they have to work outside the area. So bringing in the economic investment is good for all different socioeconomic
Well, and in
statuses.
every transportation system, the hardest part is the last mile.
Right.
Yeah. So how do you
Right.
get to the station, that last little mile around it? Everything else is easy to cover.
Thank you very much.
Thank
I
you.
Thank
appreciate
you
it.
very much.
Who'll be presenting, William? Okay, thank you.
Good evening. Oh, let's see how much we're missing.
You're on.
Am I on? Okay. Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. For the record, Dolores Key, Economic Development and Marketing Director for the City of Lake Worth Beach. Tonight, we have a little presentation on federal qualified opportunity zones. And this is a new program that was just instituted December, I believe, 27th, 2017. So it's a brand new program that was introduced. And now I can't get this to work. There we go. We actually have one qualified federal opportunity zone in the city of Lake Worth. It is Lake Worth Census Tract 5102. And it's all of the opportunity zones throughout the United States are by census tract, and it had to meet different parameters. Any zone had to be at least 20% poverty rate and median earnings below the normal range, and these were the different parameters that we had to look at. So it was felt that we wanted to show some perspective of where we fit into the thing. Our poverty rate in this particular census tract was 32.4%, which is well over the 20% needed. The median earnings were $19,000, mean earnings $27,000. So if you look at us in perspective to everywhere else where we fall in Palm Beach County, the state of Florida, and the United States, you can see where that particular census tract falls. What makes this so interesting is to qualify for any job incentive rates from the Business Development Board of Palm Beach County to have any financial incentives. We would have to be able to recruit companies that were offering salaries of $68,000. So, in other words, to bring a company, whether it's a headquarters, to create jobs, anything else, a salary would have to be in that area would have to pay $68,000. And that's also one of the impediments for us as Lake Worth as a whole, to have any companies that would come into Lake Worth. The average salary would have to be $68,000 to receive any type of job incentive grants for the city, which is what is so just across the street to receive those headquarters that actually went into the green building, to have a company headquarters to actually come in with at least 40 jobs initially, looking at 85 within the next couple of years. So that was a real big coup for us to have that. Now, if we look in Palm Beach County and the state of Florida, these are the number of opportunity zones that were created within the state of Florida. Interestingly, 427 census tracts are now part of the opportunity zones in the state, with over 1,200 that were actually nominated to the governor. This all happened in March of last year. How did we shake out in comparison to our sister cities in Palm Beach County? You can see the data to the right. Belle Glade received 2, Boynton Beach received 2, Delray Beach 3, Lake Worth Beach 1, Mangonia Park 1, Pahokee 2, Palm Springs 1, Riviera Beach 3, South Bay 2, unincorporated Palm Beach County 1, West Boca Raton 1, West Palm Beach 4, for a total of 26 opportunity zones in the county. So, down to the basics. Opportunity zone primer. There were some problems that have not been addressed in how economic development incentives have worked in the past, so they decided they needed to come up with new solutions. Because of what I was stating about how incentives have worked, where places that needed help, a helping hand to create jobs, just as I was saying, you needed a salary of $68,000 to get incentives for the county, which is 10% more than the average wage. That applies to across the nation. to receive any financial incentives, it has to be 10% higher than the mean income of any county. So that puts areas that need incentives and need help to create jobs at a disadvantage.
Genardi, did you have something?
My question was about the process of opportunity zone selection.
I'll get into that in a moment. I have that in a later slide.
Okay.
Let's maybe for this one, we'll do the presentation, then we'll all ask at the end. If that's okay with everyone?
So what happens and why the federal government came up with this was that they decided that they saw that there was a great income inequality and that it was geographic income inequality because what they had already set up and what were in place to help regions because of that $68,000 in Palm Beach County to create jobs weren't helping areas, that they needed to come up with a different system to help. They also saw that automation will expand the inequality in job creation, that there was a lack of access to private capital, and the solutions that we currently have weren't necessarily fixing the problems. In the past, we have had enterprise zones, we've had new market tax credits, we've had a progressive tax system, and we've had banking regulations. And those solutions weren't addressing all the problems that we have encountered, especially in places like Lake Worth, where we need some help and some financial incentives to be able to come to Lake Worth, but have been going to Palm Beach Gardens or to Boca Raton, where all the monies for job creation have been going in the past. Let us have some of those dollars as well. So, I think I skipped a little too far. Yeah, there we go. The opportunity zones were created to spur investment in underserved regions, and there's the long definition of it. It was, they saw a problem, and this was the solution to be able to come up with the Trump administration came up with this idea to be able to spur a way to come up with it. And interestingly, this was bipartisan solution and was adopted, I believe, like 96-4 and passed bipartisanly. This was federal tax reform legislation. It was added to the IRS tax code by the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act on December 22nd, I missed it by 5 days, in 2017. An economically distressed area that is eligible for preferential tax treatment for investors, and up to 25% of a state's low wealth census tracts and 5% of non-low census tracts that are contiguous, to low wealth districts. So what does that mean? On capital gains that an investor has, he can invest it in an opportunity zone. So you take your capital gains, and this is trying to get investors to come into those distressed communities that can take their capital gains and invest it into those census tracts. And it's, or you can do it by a stepped up basis for your capital gains to reinvest it in those communities, or you can receive permanent exclusion for that. Now, when originally passed, there were only like 96 pages of tax code relating to this. Just a week ago Wednesday, another I think I counted 296 additional pages were just released a week ago, and I have not gone through all the tax regulation to realize what it all means. However, I will get back to you on that.
Thank you. We'll give you some time to read those.
So it's a new program, so things are being flushed out. These are the key terms in regarding the opportunity zones. Capital gains, You can read it, but basically you can, depending on your tax bracket, you can be either, and depending how long you keep your money in an opportunity zone, if you keep it down and simple, if it's for 5 years, you can get like, I believe it's 7%. If you keep it for 10 years, it's totally excluded. So it's on varying degrees of how long you keep that investment in that opportunity zone. And it's also, it can be if you are a business in an opportunity zone, if you are doing capital purchases for your business, or if you're doing a development. So it's for the businesses, for small investors, as well as a large investor. Or you also can go into an opportunity zone fund. So if you take all your money and you go with a broker and you put your money into that and they invest as collective into an opportunity zone fund and they in turn invest, then that's also a tax deferral that way. What is an opportunity zone? It's one of those tracts that you saw in Florida, and interestingly, they're all across the United States. And then you can see what they call an opportunity fund, and then what is an opportunity property. So this is a little bit more about opportunity zone qualifiers. It's a community census tract where the poverty rate is at least 20% and the median family income is no greater than 80%. I told you about 5% of the tracts can also be contiguous. They were allocated 25% of the census tracts in each state can go. There were 31,680 census tracts in the United States that were qualified or could be qualified, and 8,700 census tracts have been certified by the U.S. Department of Treasury. Now we get to your question, Commissioner Amari. How were they determined? We
Go
got,
ahead if you'd like to call.
I'm sorry, and specifically my question is, we submitted several,
we submitted 7.
and I'm several. I didn't.
We submitted 7 to the county. The county whittled it down to 5.
Right.
All 5 of those went to the state.
Right. And at that point, did we use Richard Pinsky, our lobbyist?
We used Mr. Pinsky. We used the mayor. We used everyone we could, and then it came to the governor's office to decide which ones were actually forwarded to the U.S. Department of Treasury. And then that's when we got the one.
Even though we're the second most impoverished city in Long Beach County, we get one opportunity zone when Boca got 3 or whatever it was.
Yeah, and so
It's very unfortunate.
it's very frustrating.
Yes,
Especially
I
when you sit
agree.
outside the governor's office for 3 hours.
And there's a
Tears in your eyes.
48% poverty census tract in the city that did not.
Yeah.
It was baffling.
Yeah.
I concur with that, absolutely. And we had some other areas that you're correct, that had higher poverty rates, but we will work with what we have and move forward, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It's just not fair. I know.
I mean, 70% of the children in Tropical Ridge, which is this census tract here, are living in poverty. That's like absolutely insane. Did not get anyway. So, all right.
Getting screwed is
And I
normal.
guess so. There will be no opportunity in the future to add census tract. Like.
At this point, not to my knowledge.
Okay.
Unless they reinvigorate the program, which will come down from the White House, and we'll see if that happens and we get an opportunity to reapply. Yeah.
I'm
When-
sorry, I do not have an answer for
I
that
know.
question.
Sure. All right.
Vice Mayor? I
And
know
and
it's
one of my
fair.
questions goes to that too. So, we're heading into a 2020 census. Was this, so was the census that we originally used, was it the 2010 census?
No, sir, it was
census
all of this data came from the American Community Survey, which was the requirement of that was given to us, the most recent American Community Survey. And then it was verified not only by the county, but by the state, that we had the accurate numbers. So all of that data was, not only did we present it, then it had to be verified by both the county and the state, so that we all were using the same numbers. So it was all from the American Community Survey, which is the U.S. Bureau of Census, and their most recent numbers.
But their most recent numbers as they
Correct.
update periodically.
Yes. They
it
get
wasn't the
updated every year, because I keep track of that every year. I go back and update my numbers.
And so it may be to our advantage to, after the 2020 census, write a letter to and try
Definitely.
to reestablish.
Well, again, this is federal, so it would certainly behoove us to contact he's not the governor, he's State Senator Scott and State Senator Marco Rubio, to see if there is any flexibility, but I don't have an answer.
And then my other question, so you have a couple maps here and it says vacant parcels, and then
I'm going to let William get to that in a moment.
okay.
Other items under consideration. Previously, municipalities could not set up their own fund. Up for consideration, this is Florida Senate bill under consideration right at the moment. And we'll see if it passes, and there would be an effective date on 7/1/2019. You can read it for yourself. It is authorizing local governments to either update their land development codes, to take into consideration opportunity zones, as well as set up their own fund in placement of having to go out and do it. Previously, we were not able to do that, as well as possibly receiving some of those financial incentives that we otherwise would not have been able to qualify for. Go back to that $68,000 I was talking about. So we'll see how this plays out and how it is interpreted, because that would be key to help us. Also remember, under economic development parameters that are strictly applied, housing is not a qualifier. Retail is not a qualifier. Hotels do not qualify. Only value-added job creation under economic development parameters. Those are things that are not usually considered job creators. Those spend wealth that are already in your community. So we'll see how it all plays out. So, getting down into a little bit more, so here's some additional information. Capital gain deferral, which is what I was going into. There are 3 different ways that you can receive deferral on your capital gains if you invest in a opportunity zone, and you can see it outlined there. It's in your packets, and that concludes this presentation. It's a little primer, and I will let William go into the maps, because we are doing an analysis on all of the parcels within the opportunity zones and what may help us move this along.
Vice Mayor,
Go
did you have a
ahead.
question?
No, I'll wait for William to
Okay.
do his and then see if
Just
the-
one question, Dolores. I would like,
course.
I'd like a copy of the districts. Was it in the backup? Sorry, I walked away.
What were you looking for?
The other cities and the opportunity zones that they got. Where?
Yeah, here.
What?
Oh,
what zip
it's
codes?
in, it should be in your
Oh, no,
backup,
but what-
all the
track of
zones.
each one?
Oh, the map track?
Yeah, the map. I want to see the map track and the
No, we didn't get that.
Yeah, the levels for the other cities surrounding us, say West Palm, Boca. Well,
I don't
we
have,
we
I don't
West
have
Palm,
that
Marcella.
in, I don't have,
I know.
you mean where exactly they are in
Where
each?
there are opportunity zones, yeah.
Actually, the county is working on developing a map of where exactly each of those census blocks
I look
are.
forward to that.
I just received that today from them, that they are working on updating, making a website with each of the zones, and we are all supposed to supply them our information. So, I should be able to get that to you shortly.
I appreciate it. Whenever it comes though, I'm
I'd be
interested.
glad to do that, Mayor.
Thank you very much. William?
So, back to one of the issues that we were trying to cover tonight. Dolores went over the boundaries of the Opportunity Zone, which are basically 6th Avenue South, 95, the railroad tracks of FEC, and the city's southern boundary. What we're coming to you and requesting your consensus on is doing an evaluative study, a strategic plan, and a vision for those areas that under the future land use map are something other than single-family residential or single-family 2-family 14, which is along 6th Avenue, then down by the railroad tracks, which we have a TOD, Transportation Oriented Development area, artisanal industrial zone, and then some multifamily, as well as incorporating some properties that the city owns so that we could see whether or not they could play a role in actually providing an assemblage of land to encourage investment. Could we encourage the facilitation of additional community resources and community opportunities in that area? And so we have already reached out to one of our CCNA groups, WGI. They provided us a proposal for $40,000 to work collaboratively with staff to evaluate that entire area, to give us some idea of what kind of densities we might be able to encourage, the potential job creation or job numbers, what may be the potential increase in the tax base if we were able to encourage enough investment to get to some level of attainment of our development potential in these areas. And so that's what we were going to be asking for you. And if you are collectively okay with that, we will bring back to you an agreement at probably your commission meeting on the 7th of May to initiate that consultant study, which we hope to have done before the end of the summer.
And then that consultant study would then go to Charette's in the community and would
We
go
will,
to.
that will incorporate, there will be some community outreach to have input from the community before the plan's actually created. We do want to have, because there are some various options, which Dolores may have gone over, stakeholder opportunities for people who already live there, opportunities for replacement of housing, some investment opportunities for people who actually may already live there, what types of jobs or development clusters or industries they might be more interested in than others.
Where can we get a list of those opportunities?
Well, we're going to be talking to the community to get and put those together. There's probably a list as long as I could come up with, but I'm hoping that we will get some feedback from the community and work collaboratively with them and then among staff and the consultant to come up with what those best opportunities would be. Obviously, based on the future land use, we allow mixed use on 6th Avenue, which is commercial, retail, office, residential. The TOD is envisioned as our third tier station area, and that has a very high density potential. Again, it allows for mixed
Can you
use.
explain TOD for the people listening at home so that
It's
they understand what
transit-oriented
that?
development.
Meaning?
Where we hope to have a train station on
There you go,
FEC.
thank you.
And then the artisanal industrial zone, we're fairly familiar with, but that's where Matthews Brewery, the same type of zone. It's a gritty, allows mixed use of non-nuisance space industrial uses. It could be a job creator area, but you could also live there and have other types of opportunities. And then there's a multifamily area that we do see as possibly being maybe an artisanal industrial area extended, or would be a significant housing opportunity for the jobs that will be created in the artisanal zone. Well, I don't want to prejudice any of the developer, or prejudice the consultants on what we may come out in our study. We do want to have some collaborative effort with the residents in this area because it has been disenfranchised and there hasn't been a lot of investment down there, and it's quite ripe for investment from a multitude of levels. Again, on the I think, was it Mr. Amari who mentioned the vacant parcel map when I was walking in?
Commissioner Hardy?
I don't believe I mentioned the vacant parcel
Well,
map.
we did do a study to find out just what's available land in the area, which is shown in the red.
Not by us.
That's land that's undeveloped. It's
Okay,
vacant. It doesn't
so-
have a building on it.
So anybody owns it.
Anybody owns it.
Okay.
But you can tell there's not a lot of red. And so there might have to be, in order to increase development, we might have to consider incorporating some of the city's properties, which do have, they have issues in and of themselves. There's also the opportunity in some places where there are individual landowners that own quite a number of properties that may want to collectively put them in the pot to encourage development. We also did a study to see, just initially from staff, how many properties are homesteaded, which is actually higher than what we anticipated. There's a lot of homes there owned and resided in by the owners. And so that's not a disadvantage per se. It actually shows that there actually is a vested interest in that community, and hopefully they will be participants in coming up with how their community will look over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, as the Opportunity Zone has the possibility of increasing investment and really bringing up that area of the city that has been disenfranchised for so long.
Commissioner Hardy?
There were things that you said did not qualify for the breaks under the Opportunity Zone. What were some of the things that you said did not qualify, and where can we find that information in detail?
No, under normal economic development as they currently exist.
Okay.
Normally for economic development incentives, hotels, retail,
Residents.
what else did I say? Hotel, retail, residential do not qualify for economic development incentives.
But they do qualify.
They would qualify in an opportunity zone. Also, the other thing that we were looking at is because of the legislation that is now before the Senate, the Senate bill, is looking to be able to open up some of those financial incentives to the economic or the opportunity zones that in the past were only available for economic development projects. So if it may pass as is, or maybe parts of it pass, we just have to see how that legislation plays out. So it could be that there are more things that we could do or more incentives that would become available if that legislation does pass.
Okay.
Does that clarify any of it?
Yeah.
Commissioner
Okay.
Robinson?
So I'd like to hear what the possibility, if we are excluding, if all we're talking about is jobs at $68,000, right?
Under normal economic development parameters, the opportunity zone opens that up.
But it excludes residents, hotels.
No.
No, that's economic development dollars. Now the opportunity zones open up the path for all those other things that were normally excluded.
You can do that.
Okay,
Now you can do
Thank
those
you.
things.
all right.
William, did you want to?
Well, part of what our strategic plan will be as well, and the consultants brought us a little primer that I think came from Tallahassee, is to be able to package and explain all the various incentives that are already in place that could be combined with opportunity zones that could influence housing or influence a mixed-use project or create a job incubator or job creation aspect through a targeted market or targeted industry. And so it does get confusing. We're trying to whittle it down and get it simplified so that we can explain it like our primer on the incentives we have for economic development anyway. And so it is a very complex and overwhelming aspect if you look at all the different things that are in play. But we're going to try to make it simple and sellable and marketable. Because one thing that Dolores and I have spent quite a number of years now is trying to get ourselves in the path of being able to obtain or take advantage of all those incentives that are out there. And we've done a pretty good job in many things. It would be great if we could have the enterprise zone program come back. Dolores did all the study. We were qualified in 2 different areas and then they cut us off. There are a number of things that Marcela wasn't able to get into that other communities have that we are not able to do. West Palm has 2 enterprise zones. I think Riviera Beach has got 2. Belle Glade has 1. We don't have a single one. And so there are things that we're still having to try to overcome and figure out through special dispensation or collecting political power from the state, that maybe Lake Worth needs something unique and different for us because we missed out on the things that other cities have. And so hopefully this study and implementing the opportunity zone and collectively working together, we can identify a potential path that may be unique to us. So we're going to try to do that. But hopefully you will be supportive of our doing the first step after having the zone designated and doing our strategic plan.
Commissioner Robinson?
Well, the largest, easiest parcel there is the landfill area.
Yes.
So are we considering that? I mean, is that in play?
Nothing's, and I remember Mr. Amari mentioned this, use double negative, nothing's not on the table.
But we're going to study all the residential area around there, and then
Our
determine
focus
that.
in the plan is the areas that are not single-family residential.
Correct.
Because single-family residential in and of itself is not conducive to the opportunity zone options and the other incentives. And most of that is fairly intact single-family residential neighborhoods. So I don't think that we would be in a place or be prudent for us to study changing that dynamic. But the area along 6th Avenue and the area just west of the FEC tracks going down to the abandoned dump site are all areas that could very well benefit from redevelopment and looking different than they look now.
Commissioner Hardy? Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, I was just
Finish.
looking
No.
forward to the SIMRAC or whatever being housed
Yeah,
next
manufacturing.
to our
plant on
solar
some-
field.
Yeah, maybe so.
Commissioner Hardy?
So I'll just say, I think the opportunity zones present a tremendous opportunity, right? But I have a concern, right? And so, my concern is like, for whom are these zones going to generate opportunities, right? And my concern is that while there may be movement and development and activity, within these zones, I think as a city, we have to take very special care to ensure that projects that happen there, that we can draw a straight line from these projects that we're trying to incentivize, that we can draw a straight line from these things happening to the lives of people who are living in the opportunity zone improving, right? And so, whatever happens, that's just my personal thing. It's great if we get some projects, it's great if we get some developments, but I want to make sure that no matter what happens, no matter what gets built, that the people who are living there right now today are going to benefit from it in some tangible way that I can count, see, measure, touch, feel, right? And that's my only concern, because I could see, and I've read a few articles, not to say, but it's just like the potential for things to happen in these zones, right? That don't necessarily help people is there, and I just want to make sure that we really are on top of that part of the opportunity.
We're gonna tackle this.
In addition to that, are there any incentives for small businesses or minority-owned businesses? Are there any types of things in investment in that area that go along with an opportunity zone?
And
Well, that's part of what our study will be looking at, is what programs collectively can be put together to encourage investment. We're also going to be proposing, and I don't want to get into too much of the particular because I haven't all worked it out yet, but a consortium or stakeholders holding group, whereby if you own property there, let's say that you would like to put up your property and it's like 2% of what is coming in development, you could have a vested interest in the coming project. Let's say that you're an elderly person who owns a home that's in that study area, and you may want to transition out of that, and you would like to have some sort of life income. In theory, we could create a consortium where that person would become a member. As development comes, they get a residual return of investment, maybe a new home, a a transitional home, and then possibly phased revenue over time. It's complicated. I'm still trying to get pieces of it together so I could explain it a little bit better than what I just have. But we do not have a interest in disenfranchising those people who are there. And there will be some strategic measures identified in the strategic plan that we can incorporate in our budget and in our capital improvement plan, as well as the planning initiatives for the opportunity zone to ensure that the people that live there will benefit from the investment that happens.
Cool. And if I can just, have we thought about CBAs with this? I mean, that seems to me like a kind of a CBA, a community benefits agreement, so that when people come in and do these projects, that we can say, hey, if we're going to provide you all these incentives, if we're going to bend over backwards to make your project happen, you have to do X, Y, Z, A, B, C for the community that surrounds that project to make sure.
That is something that will come out of it. We've been talking about that. It could be an offshoot of our Sustainable Bonus Incentive Program. You get these incentives, and here's what you have to give back in furtherance of the community. But if we have those identified in the strategic plan, it could work very much like an extraction in a way. That's what I mean, I don't know how I'm supposed to call it, but yes, that's on the table.
Okay.
Vice Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, and thank you, Commissioner Hardy, for your comments about that direct line between potential development and the benefits, because that is certainly a primary concern of mine, is that we are not positioning ourselves or this area in any way, shape, or form for any form of disenfranchisement. That at the end of the day, the benefit has to be directly to this community. Okay. We cannot have, which goes back to, I guess, you're looking for consensus on the strategic plan. How long is it going to take us to get into those discussions or whatever, and how long will it be before we can start bringing in stakeholders and having them speak and add, if you will, to the robust discussion on what they think is going to be best for their community and what benefits they're looking for. Because at the end of the day, I can tell you for myself, my support of this whole initiative is totally dependent on an absolute, benefit to the local folks. And these ideas, these creative ideas that we've talked about, of maybe bringing some of these property owners into some sort of a consortium where they actually have a skin in the game, I think is really exciting. And I just hope that we don't rush this too much. Of course, now this is a 10-year program. So the other question I have is the clock already ticking, or does it start ticking when we come to some sort of a MOU or some sort of an agreement with the federal government? And
The clock is already ticking.
okay,
However, I would suspect that since it had bipartisan support and they are still writing the tax code on it,
sure.
I would suspect that they would probably extend it. Don't hold me to that. But like I said, they just issued the second tranche of tax code related to it a week and a day ago that now is going out for review and public comment. So I'm not quite sure how they can say you're already 1 year into this, so now you only have 9 years when they still haven't defined all the rules of the game. So I would, and like I said, it did have bipartisan support. So I would suggest we all go ahead and start writing our Congress, our elected officials, and say, hey, look, we think this is a grand program, but you can't go ahead and start the ticker now since you haven't even defined the rules yet.
Well, the exciting thing about this is it's unfortunate that the 4 census tracts were essentially denied, if you will.
I agree.
It's unfortunate. I do believe, though, that if we are able to, if the stakeholders and the property owners in this area are willing to embrace this idea, I think that the creativity that has been shown in the past in this city was particularly by the CRA and their ability to put a bunch of different entities together and pull off the NSP2 program, and that program being held up as being a model, if you will, for the nation. I really expect that a successful creation and or implementation of this opportunity zone is going to be appealing to the federal government to do it again, to create another round of this, because I think most of us would agree that even if we lived in a perfect world and all of these opportunity zones that have been designated as we speak are phenomenal successes, there's still so many more out there. This is just the tip of the iceberg of the need that we have across the country. So I'm looking forward to this, but again, I want to caution staff and everybody else that's part of this, that this is going to be, in my mind's eye, has to be stakeholder driven in terms of, what that final vision is going to look like. These folks, in my mind's eye, they have to, in many cases, travel so far to get the goods and services that they need and want in their neighborhood, to participate in amenities that they may want or need. And I think it's high time that we position them and the community at large in such a way that they will finally, after a very long period of time of being neglected and put on the back burner, so to speak, will finally be able to enjoy a quality of life in neighborhoods like some of the other neighborhoods we have in our community and around Palm Beach County. So thank you for your presentation, and I guess we're going to have to
I would ask, I
make a
guess you're
decision.
looking for consensus on whether or not we will allow, what was the amount of money again? Can you repeat it?
$40,000.
$40,000
The
to
goal would be to have something that would be prepared and ready for you to consider for any budget implications by August or September.
okay, do we have consensus?
Yes.
Commissioner Robinson?
Sure.
I'm very excited about this, Madam
Thank you
Mayor.
very much.
Okay, excellent. Yep, you do. All right, thank you all very much for coming. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Second? Second?
Second.
All those in favor state so by saying aye. Aye. Good night, everyone. Thank you, everyone at home.
Go to